Hello and welcome to the Racing News 365.com podcast looking ahead to this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix, the first since 2019. Joining myself, Nick Golding, as always, is 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Coop, and of course, lead editor, Ian Parks. Ian, should we start with the breaking news because you are in the paddock this weekend?
I'm back. Yes, I'll be back, folks, after two Grand Prix at home, Australian and Japanese. I will be live once again from the paddock and looking forward to Shanghai. First time in 5 years this race is taking place. And if you remember, the 2019 Chinese Grand Prix was the 1000th in Formula One history. 5 years on, here we are, and we're finally going to get another Chinese Grand Prix. So it should be good. It is one of the biggest paddocks in Formula One. It is enormous, and it has the most convoluted system for where the teams are based as well, in terms of gaining access to their paddock buildings. They are able to hide themselves away. They are not in plain sight in this Chinese Grand Prix paddock. It is something very different. So I'll make sure, Sam, Nick, that when I'm there, when we do our head-to-heads, I'll be coming live from one of those.
Well, we need to be watching the F1 updates. That's a reason to watch it if you haven't already got one. Sam, coming to you, it's been 5 years since F1 was last at the Shanghai International Circuit. In that time, in the last 5 years, name one thing that has happened to you.
That's happened to me?
Well, one thing about you that's happened since the last time we raced in China.
I started working in Formula One. I mean, I was still 2-3 years away from first working in F1 when the 2019 Chinese Grand Prix happened. It wasn't even on my radar at that stage. So that's one big thing. Got engaged, got a place for my partner. So yeah, my life has moved on considerably in that time.
It's actually quite a good point because I hadn't written my first article before the last autograph. That's because I've now got a fan account on social media.
You're now famous, Nick. This is it. People want your autograph.
Well, it's fun. I've actually now got a fan account on Twitter after all my travel struggles with Formula E, but that's another story. No, that's a good point actually, because I think, I hadn't written an article, prior to the last Chinese Grand Prix. Again, since then I've gotten engaged, done a university degree. It's actually quite weird when you think just how long it's been. We've gone through the whole COVID-19 pandemic. It's Ian, for you, come on, what's happened to you in the last 5 years?
I've changed website. I've changed website for 3 times over the past few years. That's for sure. I've managed to get a permanent pass again, which is fantastic. Covering Formula One used to be race by race, but back to being permanent. That opens up a lot of doors. Just to let people know, there are 2 types of pass for media when it comes to accreditation. You can either apply for a race by race, which has a different lanyard colour, or you are a permanent pass holder, which means that you have to attend a certain number of Grand Prix over the course of a season to then be granted the permanent pass for the following season. And again, that has a different lanyard colour. And as I say, it is quite significant. It does allow you access to certain briefings and press conferences and all that kind of stuff that is really so much more beneficial compared to just being simply race by race. So, and of course, I've started working for Racing News 365. As mentioned, this is my 3rd different website due to circumstances over the past few years. And it's been a real privilege so far. And I get to work with you guys. What more can I say?
Yeah. No. I mean, one fun fact, kind of specifically related to the 2019 race that really highlighted to me just how long it's been, is that the fastest lap point was taken by Pierre Gasly in that race in a Red Bull. It's been that, like, in some ways it's like, has it only been 5 years? Yeah. But also, I can't believe it was that long ago that he. So it's mad, isn't it? Yeah. I think everything that's happened in that time, going back to AlphaTauri, winning the race, the Monza Grand Prix, it's been quite the journey for Pierre Gasly as well.
Well, that brings us on, I think, to a nice starting point, because I know we're here, joking about how long it's been since the last Chinese Grand Prix. a quick game. There are 6 drivers who are on the grid that day that are no longer on the grid. Ian, can you name all 6?
I am absolutely hopeless at these types of things. My F1 history knowledge is pretty poor, I have to say. 6.
I've got 4.
Go for it, Sam. I'll let Sam take the lead on this one.
Vettel, Kubica, Kubica, however you want to say it.
Kubica,
Antonio Giovinazzi.
Yep.
Kimi Räikkönen.
Yeah, there's 2 more.
Roman Grosjean.
Yes, and there's 1 more.
And
excellent
Danny
work, Sam.
Kvyat.
It is Danny Kvyat. Which is then, the podium that year was Hamilton, Bottas, Vettel. So there's absolutely no chance that's being repeated. It is though quite crazy because it's so rare for this kind of thing to happen where it's been not in this 5 years. This weekend, whilst it's a venue Formula One has visited so many times, it's almost like a brand new track. It's obviously completely different cars, 18-inch tyres, and Pirelli are obviously concerned about the track surface. The teams are concerned as well. And it's a sprint weekend, the first of 2024. It does feel like this is going to be an eventful weekend, Ian.
As you mentioned, it almost feels like the very first time. I've seen rumours and comments and reports about this being Istanbul Park 2.0. If you remember what happened. We have another star guest.
I also have a cat. Say hello, Millie.
We have another star guest. I think Millie needs to move. There we go.
Yeah. Apologies.
That's okay. I've got mine lying right next to me. Just Lily's next to me. As you mentioned, as I was just referring to there, Istanbul Park 2.0.
For those who are listening to audio, by the way, Sam's cat's tail was just basically wafted against his face. I
might have to close the door, remove her slightly from
I feel sorry for
the podcast.
I feel sorry for those who are listening to this on audio because you're probably thinking, what on earth is going on? Effectively, cats have taken over the Racing News 365 podcast, not for the first time. It's becoming.
I'll be right back.
This is award-winning content, by the way.
And this is the start of our Chinese GP content, and what a week we have ahead of us. But Ian,
Istanbul Park 2.0, because if you remember what happened, we hadn't been to that circuit for a couple of years. It had been brand new surface leading up to the weekend, and literally all the oils out of the bitumen had seeped to the top of the surface. And of course, it was a damp weekend, which is actually one thing we're not going to get by the looks of the weather forecast for this weekend. So that's not going to be something additional to the pot. But even so, it's still going to be greasy. It's still going to be oily if it's only recently been resurfaced. And we've got 1 hour of practice, 1 hour before those guys have got to go into the sprint shootout. It's going to be absolutely fascinating, thrilling. I'm prepared for lots of complaints across the course of the weekend from the drivers, from the team principals, if it proves to be, as earlier mentioned, another Istanbul Park 2.0 from a few years back. Should be fascinating to watch, though. Looking forward to it immensely.
Dare I say Lance Stroll pole?
Again, he loves those kind of conditions, doesn't he?
Exactly. So
save the bold prediction to the end, of course.
But it's interesting though, because I mean, I think it's fair enough that a lot of F1 fans don't watch, say, all 3 practice sessions over the weekend, or would maybe miss one if it's in the middle of the night, as this one will be. But I think if you're going to choose a free practice session to watch this year, it's got to be free practice here in China. It's going to be absolutely fascinating, as you say, because you have a mistake, you have an issue, and that puts your entire weekend out of its window.
You're going to be a die-hard fan if you're going to get up to watch this particular practice session in the UK or Europe or wherever you might be watching this podcast or listening to it. It's 4:30 UK start time, which represents 5:30 Europe. And then, of course, that's 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time if you're on the East Coast of the United States. Hey, not too bad if you're on the West Coast, of course. That could be 8:30 in the evening for you guys. So have fun if you're watching it wherever you're watching it. But as Sam's pointed out, I think it could be a really interesting one because they are going to have to cram in so much work, so much track learning, so much learning about these cars because they've not been around this circuit, so much learning about the tyres because this tyre hasn't been on this circuit for 5 years. So just it's going to be an extraordinary one. As somebody pointed out to me, who on earth decided to hold a sprint race over this particular weekend when F1 has not visited China for 5 years? It could be a lot of fun, that's for sure.
That brings us on to our next talking point. And for those who are watching on YouTube, make sure to comment your thoughts below. Do you think F1 has done the right thing putting this as a sprint weekend? Because obviously, whilst it will add a huge element of excitement because the sport is entering very much into the unknown. From a driver's perspective and a team perspective, data is going to be critical this weekend, and that's the one thing they're going to really struggle. To get. Are you in favour of this being a sprint weekend, or do you think we should have kept to the traditional format?
I'm going to refer to the comments from Max and Carlos post-Japanese Grand Prix. And they were asked about it in the post-race press conference, the top three post-race press conference. And both of those guys were like, not so much incredulous, but it was like, why have we done this? It doesn't make sense, apart from the fact, of course, entertainment. It all comes down, bottom line, it's about the entertainment factor. And that's why we have these American owners. That's why we have these decisions that have been made. And at the end of the day, the decision was taken, I would have thought, in conjunction with the teams as well. They would have been canvassed for their opinion. And it's come down to, here we are. It's China, guys. Basically, get on with it. We all know Max's love, sarcastic remark, of sprint race weekends. Well, this is a number one fan. Wear the hat, Max. And he's just going to be far from a happy bunny. Certainly on Friday, he's concerned because we know what, and he said it himself, as I say, post-Japanese Grand Prix, he's just not a happy fan at all. And I think he's going to be even less happy after this weekend, particularly if something goes wrong for him or for Red Bull. It's going to be even less enamoured. Sam, what about you?
I think there's two ways of answering this, and you've touched upon this already, is that if you ask the teams and the drivers, you get one answer. If you ask the shareholders or fans, you're probably going to get a different one, because it does make it must-watch F1 viewing, absolutely. But also, it's tipping towards the entertainment side of things as opposed to the sporting side of things. And that's, I think, where that kind of tension, that friction we've had in the last few years in F1 has been. But I think it's all on the sprint weekends generally. I think it's very telling that the man who benefits the most from them, points wise, has done since they were introduced, is probably the most vocal critic of them. So if you can't get Max Verstappen on board, you're fighting a losing battle. But I think it will be fascinating. But also, I think, if I were a driver, I'd be going, why have you done this to me? Like, could we not just have a nice, easy, simple weekend?
Normal weekend.
Yeah. So I think, from that perspective, I think it's a little bit kind of feisty as a decision, but we are where we are. And I'm from a kind of a journalistic point of view, there'll be lots to write about. So I'm happy in that sense.
Jinxed it now. Well done. It's going to be a boring weekend. Nothing to write about.
Rubbish.
No contract news.
No.
The thing is, I actually do wonder if there's a certain element of, because we've not been to China since 2019, have F1 put on the sprint weekend in a way to almost pay back the fans a little bit in China for having, not really just no F1 racing, pretty much no racing across the board. The Shanghai International Circuit has barely been used. But of course, I did allude about contract news because that is what we've had ahead of this weekend. A certain Fernando Alonso, who was giving us the impression he may retire from the sport, he's only going to sign the new 2-year deal with Aston Martin.
We did talk about this, didn't we? Where would we like to see Fernando go? And of course, I mentioned it'll be great to see him at Red Bull alongside Max. I don't think that was never going to happen. That was just a lovely pipe dream that I think any F1 fan would have loved to have seen Max and Fernando going head to head like that. That would have been amazing. We all thought, was Mercedes an option? But of course, always in the background, there was the opportunity for him to stay at Aston. Or he could have retired. He could have said, "No, I'm done, guys. Come back for a few years. It's all getting a bit too much. I've got to really try and look after myself." But below me, you read his comments, and it's like he loves, lives, breathes still F1 at the age of 42. He's going to be 43 in July. He's going to be 45 by the time this next contract ends. Just unbelievable. He is an enigma for a modern day sportsman in terms of his longevity. You very rarely see it these days. A guy so committed, just mentally, physically, in every way to his sport. Tom Brady did it in American football. LeBron James is doing it at present in American basketball. These guys proving that where there is a will and providing the body holds up, that they just want to carry on because they love it so much. Yes, Fernando has. I'm sure if you sat down with Fernando and you asked him what his diet was like when he first started out in Formula One 2 decades ago to what his diet is like now, and it would be completely chalk and cheese in terms of what he was eating then to what he's eating now, because
I'd be talking chalk.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Because nutrition has become an integral part of a sports person's way of life. And for him, it's the fitness as well, the regime that he's got to go through, because now we've got these 24 Grand Prix calendar, as well as the 6 sprint races. You are talking about 30 races a year. And the G-forces that are being exerted on the body as well, when you factor that into the equation. So for him to make this decision to continue into what will be his 46th year, effectively, as a racing driver, in terms of age, continuing his career into near enough 25 years it'll almost be by the time that particular point comes along. You just got to say hats off, Fernando, and all credit to you for what you have decided to do. He is leading the way and showing any other racing driver that's now coming along effectively what can be done. As I say, where there is a will, there is a way. Boy, does he have the will. And hopefully the way will come that I hope for him, for his sake, he gets that 33rd win, this albatross that's been hanging around his neck for all these years. 2013, that last Grand Prix victory, that 32nd win. We'd love to see it. I think for any neutral fan, even if you're a fan of a particular racing driver, you're going to want to see it, that 33rd win for him. Will he get the 3rd world title? Aston Martin are certainly the team that's making considerable strides. A lot is going to depend on 2026 and that Honda engine in the back of the Aston Martin. That could be a real game changer for them. So, just getting back to the bottom line, brilliant for Fernando. Absolutely brilliant that he's going to continue.
I think what's incredible is that despite his age, he's proven that it is possible to still be so competitive, because when you look to when Michael Schumacher came back, in his 40s, he wasn't, the same driver he was when he retired the first time.
Yeah.
If you look at two wheels in MotoGP, Valentino Rossi continued to win into his 40s, and unfortunately his career started to wane as he got older. Whereas Alonso is just this enigma. With Alonso, though, now his contract been sorted for the next 2 years until the end of 2026, does all the attention now turn solely to Carlos Sainz? Go on, Sam.
Yes, in some ways, because he is now the de facto leading proposition in the driver market. He is the go-to free agent if you're in talks with him. So yes, he does now hold the key in that sense. However, the most obvious suitor has eyes for someone else in Andrea Antonelli. So it's not as simple as, yes, it is Carlos Sainz, because you've got an F2 driver that Mercedes are not willing to miss out on, having felt like they did with Verstappen a decade ago. And they weren't willing to offer Lewis Hamilton a contract that he wanted, and they didn't know at the time, but that's what precipitated them losing him to Ferrari. I think that, or one of the reasons that he went to Ferrari, I think Carlos Sainz, I just don't see how that works in the way that Carlos Sainz wants it to. It could be a year and then he pivots to, the Audi project. But again, I feel like that comes too soon for him. So yeah, Carlos Sainz is the go-to, unless someone like an Alex Albon, who Williams have been very, very sure to kind of rule out the drive market. He's our driver next year, unless he starts trying to push on an exit clause or what have you, whatever might be in that contract, because he would have been hoping for more from Williams. I think at that point, that's when it maybe becomes a 2-horse race. But yeah, it's Carlos Sainz at the moment, but his options are limited.
I mean, what we know and what we can say is that we've been led to believe that Carlos quite obviously has held talks with Mercedes.
Yep.
From what we understand, there is no definitive contract offer on the table, but there is the suggestion of a 1+1 deal. So he will go to Mercedes for next year. He'll be George Russell's teammate for a year. That then leaves Carlos options open for Carlos in terms of what he wants to do at the end of 2025. It also leaves Mercedes. They have then options out of 25 into 26 because George Russell's contract expires at the end of 2025. There's another interesting point to throw into the mix. So you mentioned the Audi project, Sam, and of course Carlos has been heavily linked with this for quite some time now. Naturally, his father has great links with Audi. We know Carlos Sainz Sr. has been, from what we've led to believe, been giving him the push. Oh, go to Audi. It's going to be great. They will come good, obviously, because they've got they're this great brand, great manufacturer. They've got all these resources, and you do anticipate that at some stage, Audi, even if they don't hit the ground running in 2026, you assume, because of the name, because of the brand, because of the history, because of the money, the resources behind it, they will eventually come good. Maybe 27, maybe 28. You assume that Carlos is going to have to wait, if he does go in 2026, for that to come good. It's not going to happen for him straight away. So that all of a sudden we've got all these options coming into play. Could Mercedes retain Carlos for another year in 26? Could they ditch George at the end of 25? Could bring in Kimi Antonelli? It's that fascinating merry-go-round driver market that we all love to discuss and gives us so many talking points and speculative options to narrate over. But yes, for me at the moment, Carlos Sainz is the big name now that needs tying up, because let's face it, yes, we've discussed Max and Mercedes. Again, there's that option again, isn't it? Could Max join Mercedes in 26 when the new power unit regulations come into force? So again, Mercedes are covered for next year. They've got Carlos. So many variables. Love it.
Verstappen and Antonelli at Mercedes in 26, I wouldn't be saying no. In terms of the silly season now, though, with Alonso having committed to Aston Martin, with Sainz being linked the most with Mercedes and Audi, does this all of a sudden take some weight off the shoulders of Sergio Perez? Because Alonso, the big question was, could he do a magical, end of career swan song at Red Bull possibly, but all of a sudden now in Carlos, it seems that him to Red Bull has quietened down a bit. It is, Daniel Ricciardo's not performing, Yuki Tsunoda is, but there's always kind of been the feeling that Yuki to Red Bull is just never going to happen.
Yeah, they've never been seemingly hot on Yuki. For whatever reason, they've always had a driver that they've kind of has found themselves almost stuck at that second team in the Red Bull family. It used to be Pierre Gasly, now it is Yuki Tsunoda. And I think that from Sergio Perez's perspective, though, I don't think the Alonso move moves the needle for Perez. I think he always would have felt pretty confident that Red Bull aren't willing to upset their own apple cart just to bring in an Alonso type figure, especially in a year when they've had a lot of disruption off track, and that has pushed the Verstappen camp to be a little bit more antagonistic in the media than they previously would have been. So why run that risk? Yeah, Max is the clear number one guy in F1 at the moment, and you have him. It's working. Sergio's not as close a match for Max as I think some people maybe would like, or fans would certainly like. I think fans kind of more envisaged a kind of Hamilton-Rosberg-like dynamic between the two, and at least it's been flirted with early in seasons in the past. But I don't think Sergio Perez would have been particularly concerned. I think he's probably been feeling pretty comfortable since the start of the year, since he saw that Ricciardo hasn't been able to kind of elevate the RB in the way that he would have been hoping to.
I think as well, what was quite key was what came out of the Japanese Grand Prix. And I think we touched on this as well, guys, how Christian Horner was really waxing lyrical about Checo's performance that particular race. And also Checo himself indicated that he was expecting things to be done and dusted within a few weeks, potentially by end of this month, potentially by middle of April, middle of May, perhaps. Yeah, there was those little indicators that suggested to me that it looks like he's going to stay. And in fairness, when you look at what he's done so far this season, with the exception of Australia, and we talked about this, that he didn't take full advantage of Max's early retirement. He had that 3-place grid play, and then he had his own issues as well with the RB20. So we're led to believe during that Grand Prix. But outside of that, the other races, he's done exactly what you would have expected of him to do as a number 2 driver, which is basically finish number 2 to Max. And yes, he did get second in the championship last season. Eventually, it wasn't the greatest of seasons. We know that with him. He had a lot of issues along the way, a lot of confidence issues with the car. It took him a long time to find the correct path with that car, but he got the job done, you could say. He got second place. He helped Red Bull win the Constructors' Championship, although Max pretty much did that on his own anyway. Didn't even need Checo. And coming into this season with a lot of pressure upon his shoulders, he knew his seat. He knew his seat is available at the end of this season. That he's basically, as I say, he's got the job done. What more could you expect or want of your number 2 driver? So why not give him just a 1-year extension for next season? And again, that wouldn't be a major surprise if that was the case. They just extended his contract by 1 year. And then again, you see how things play out. You see how the driver market unfolds. Got 2026 coming along, new power unit regulations. There could be a new team on the grid. If Andretti gets its way eventually, they will want 2 drivers. Could Checo go there? Again, all speculative grist to the mill, which we love talking about.
Let's go back to China. Who does this weekend suit the best, given that there is so many unknowns? Tough question.
I mean, that is a tough question. I think realistically, the teams it suits the best are whoever in that bottom 5 can get themselves just on the edge of the points for, be it in qualifying, be it in obviously maybe a more difficult proposition in the sprint because points only run down to 8th. But whoever is there knocking on the door, able to make them take the benefit of one of the big 5 making a mistake or going a wrong way setup wise or so have you. So I think they're the teams that kind of stand to benefit. And unfortunately, I think that's probably the case most races, but I think the window of opportunity is larger here. It's greater. This will be one that those teams are circling, going, this is the opportunity. This is the great equalizer in terms of performance, because it's a step into the unknown for everyone.
But of course, there is actually a slightly less chance of there being a setup mistake, because obviously this weekend is the first time in the sprint format having two parc fermés. The first one is before sprint qualifying. The second is after the sprint race. You got it. So it's obviously because of this as well, because the big problem we've seen in the sprints to date is that the teams have had, one practice session to get the car into, whatever window they can, and then ultimately that's in the wrong direction for the entire weekend. Now, if there is a wrong setup for the sprint, at least for the main qualifying and the actual race itself, they can go with a setup which they think is correct. Do you think this could actually result in, Ian, the sprint being actually slightly more predictable than we've seen in the past, because the teams will have, a better understanding of, setups?
The sprint race itself.
Sorry, the qualifying and the main race.
For the qualifying. Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, because obviously, if you think about it, what previously occurred was that we had parc fermé come into force pretty much straight away after first practice.
Yeah.
So then every team car driver was locked in to whatever they'd done. So obviously that ensured that the sprint quali and the sprint race did have a degree of unpredictability to them. So at least we are going to have that going into sprint quali, sprint race. We've only got one practice session. Then as soon as the sprint quali starts, or the sprint shootout, as we should give it its correct name, that's when parc fermé kicks in. Closes then at the end of the sprint race itself on the Saturday. And then, as you say, parc fermé reopens. And at least then, I think it didn't work previously, the way they had. It just didn't work. It was grossly unfair to the teams and the drivers. If something happened, as we saw, there was an incident, and they couldn't really change anything. They were penalised for it. They had to make the changes. And I think to have parc fermé in place as it did over the past couple of seasons, really shut everything down across the course of the rest of the weekend. So I think the way they've now organised and structured the weekend, and again, opening parc fermé, it is at the end of the day, it's only going to be a 3-hour window. Yeah. So it's, if you've got changes to make, you've still got to get them done in a pretty damn good timely fashion before qualifying starts. And you've still only got unusual data to draw back on, because you've only had the one practice session. You barely had any time to do long runs. Okay, you will have had the sprint race itself, but then you've got to quickly extrapolate the data from that sprint race and do whatever you can then during that 3-hour window before then qualifying starts. And are you aiming for qualifying, or are you then going to try and aim for the Grand Prix itself in terms of your setup? So there's still a lot of variables that come into play here. It's not just strictly black, white. Yes, this can be done, this can't be done. So for me, it's the right format. This is a really good regulatory decision on this occasion. And I think it's still going to lend itself to, hopefully, a good weekend. In particular, because we're at a circuit we've not raced on for 5 years. So again, that lends itself to adding to those unknowns.
With everything we have discussed in mind, it is that time of the podcast, a bold prediction.
How can we predict for this one?
I mean, Sam, I know you've kind of said, obviously, Lance Stroll pole, but because you've said that, you do now need to say another one, I'm afraid.
Oh, it's disqualified it. Oh, no.
It's DSQ.
I mean, I don't think I would have gone with that one anyway, to be fair. Such has been the delta in performance. I mean, but again, it's, kind of, no one would have predicted it for the first time round. A prediction for, I don't think we're going to have a Max Verstappen or Carlos Sainz race win, Grand Prix win.
Good clarification on the Grand Prix win rather than the sprint win.
Because one of them could take the sprint, and then everyone's going, oh well, it's not a real win. So I think that this could be, and I'm going to keep it still fairly vanilla. My caveat: I think this could be a Perez or Leclerc opportunity.
Interesting. Ian? Because I'm still thinking.
You're still thinking. Are we looking at the entire weekend as a whole?
It's going to entire weekend as a whole.
It's a
really.
Yeah, I was going to say, mate.
We've done a lot of predictions.
Of all the predictions that we could have tried to come out with here, this is probably the one that nobody has any clue over.
Well, whilst we're thinking, seeing those watching on YouTube, let us know your predictions, because it is a really, really hard one because there are so many unknowns. I think, I am going to go for Fernando Alonso victory. There we go. Given that, having announced his new contract, we were saying how amazing Alonso win would be. Why not? It's going to be a crazy weekend, so why not a crazy race winner? So that just leaves you, Ian, all the pressure.
You've made my prediction look like child's play. But yeah, Ian, I'm keen to hear yours.
I'm going to suggest that Mercedes are finally going to get their act together. They will have had another 2 weeks of learning, of understanding, and I would expect them now to come to the party and be a major player and not this embarrassing also ran that they have been over these past few races. So yeah, I'm going for Mercedes somewhere in the top 3. I can't predict race win. I think that's going a step too far, but I would anticipate one of their 2 cars being in the top 3.
Well, for those who watch and listen to our content, you will know by now that whenever we do make predictions, odds on they are normally horribly wrong. So we're saying that it's probably going to be another Red Bull 1-2. Alonso's going to finish outside the points and Mercedes won't make Q3. It has been the Racing News 365.com podcast looking ahead to the Chinese Grand Prix from Ian, Sam and myself. We'll catch you next time. See you later.
And I'll see you in Shanghai, folks.